The afternoon light streamed through the old community hall windows, catching dust motes that danced above rows of mismatched chairs. Sarah Beth stood in the cramped back room, her trembling fingers smoothing the ivory fabric of her grandmother's wedding dress. The lace had yellowed slightly over 40 years, and she'd spent 3 evenings carefully mending a torn seam near the waist, but it fit her perfectly. Her mother had worn this dress, and her grandmother before that. Through the thin walls she could hear guests arriving, their footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum floor. She pressed her hand against her stomach, trying to calm the butterflies. Tom would be waiting at that simple altar they'd decorated with wildflowers from the field behind his parents' farm. After 5 years together, through his mother's illness and her father's long unemployment, they'd finally saved enough for this small wedding. Her eyes filled with happy tears as she whispered to her reflection, "This is really happening. Where are you watching from today?" Sarah Beth had met Tom Whitfield at the county hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. He'd been visiting his mother every day after her stroke, and Sarah had noticed how gently he'd hold the older woman's hand, reading to her from worn paperback mysteries even when doctors said she might not hear him. One evening, as Sarah was checking his mother's vitals, Tom looked up from his book with tired eyes and said, "Thank you for being so kind to her. She always loved people who smiled real smiles." That simple observation had started everything. They'd fallen in love slowly, the way good things often grow, over shared coffee in the hospital cafeteria and long walks through town when their shifts ended. Tom worked construction, his hands calloused and strong from years of honest labor. His family had farmed the same land for 3 generations until his father's accident forced them to sell most of it, keeping only the small house and a few acres. Sarah's family hadn't fared much better. Her father had worked at the textile mill until it closed, and her mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. Neither family had money for a fancy wedding, but both had hearts full of love and pride for their children. They'd pooled together what they could, and Tom's sister had offered the community hall for free since she knew the caretaker. Sarah's aunt made the cake. Tom's uncle was playing guitar for the ceremony, and Sarah's best friend since 3rd grade, Jenny, stood beside her now as maid of honor in a simple blue dress they'd found at the thrift store. "You look beautiful," Jenny whispered, adjusting the small spray of baby's breath in Sarah's brown hair. "Tom's gonna cry when he sees you. I just know it." Sarah smiled, but her happiness dimmed slightly when she heard a sharp voice cut through the gentle murmur of arriving guests. "Well, I certainly didn't expect it to be here. Where on earth did Victoria think she was bringing us?" Through a gap in the doorway, Sarah caught a glimpse of an elegant woman in her early 60s, dripping with jewelry that caught the light. Her silver hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her burgundy suit looked like it cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. Behind her stood Victoria, Tom's cousin from the city. Victoria had always been kind to Sarah, despite growing up in a completely different world after her father started that successful real estate company. She'd insisted on coming to the wedding and bringing her future mother-in-law, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, though Tom had warned her it might be uncomfortable for someone used to country club affairs. Aunt Patricia did her best with what she had. "Catherine," Victoria said quietly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Tom and Sarah are wonderful people. You'll see." Mrs. Hartwell's lips pressed into a thin line as she surveyed the folding chairs. The hand-painted banner reading, "Congratulations Tom and Sarah Beth," the simple wildflower arrangements in mason jars. Her expression suggested she'd just stepped into a barn rather than a humble celebration of love. Sarah's stomach twisted. She'd known not everyone would understand their simple wedding, but something in that woman's face spoke of judgment that went deeper than just disappointment over decorations. Jenny must have noticed Sarah's distress because she squeezed her hand. "Don't you pay any attention to whoever that is. This day is about you and Tom, nobody else." Sarah nodded, trying to reclaim the joy she'd felt moments before. Her father appeared at the door then, his Sunday suit brushed clean, his eyes already glistening with tears. "You ready, sweetheart? Your young man's waiting, and he looks like he might pass out from happiness any minute." She laughed, the sound breaking through her worry. "I'm ready, Daddy." As they made their way to the doorway, Sarah could hear Tom's uncle beginning to strum the opening chords of Here Comes the Sun on his acoustic guitar. Through the gap in the door, she saw Tom standing at the altar, his face lighting up as he realized she was about to walk down the aisle. He wore the same navy suit he'd worn to job interviews, but he'd bought a new white shirt and a tie that matched her flowers. His brown hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, those warm eyes that had first captured her heart in that hospital hallway, were full of such pure love that everything else seemed to fade away. Then Mrs. Hartwell's voice rang out again, loud enough to carry over the guitar. "Good heavens, Victoria, tell me this isn't actually happening. This is like something from a television drama about poor people." The music stopped. The room fell silent. Sarah's father's arm tensed under her hand. Through the open door, she saw Tom's face change from joy to something harder, protective. Victoria looked mortified, whispering urgently to Mrs. Hartwell, but the damage was done. Every guest had heard. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, her beautiful moment crumbling like old paper. Sarah's father started to turn back, his weathered face flushed with anger, but she held his arm tightly. "No, Daddy," she whispered. "Please, let's just go." Her voice shook despite her attempt at composure. She wouldn't let this woman, whoever she was, steal this moment from them. She'd spent too many years watching Tom work double shifts so they could afford a future together. She'd held his hand through his mother's death, and he'd held hers when her father's depression after losing his job had gotten so dark they'd feared the worst. They'd earned this day with more than money could ever buy. Tom's uncle started playing again, his fingers moving deliberately across the guitar strings. Sarah lifted her chin and walked forward, her father matching her pace. As they moved down the short aisle, Sarah saw the faces of people she loved. Her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Tom's father standing tall despite his cane, pride radiating from his weathered features. Jenny's kids sitting in the front row, their faces scrubbed clean and full of excitement. These were her people. This was her family. And there, at the end of that aisle, stood the man who loved her, not despite their struggles, but through them. When she reached Tom, he took both her hands in his, and she saw his jaw working, emotions struggling beneath the surface. His eyes moved past her briefly to where Mrs. Hartwell sat, then returned to Sarah's face with such tenderness that she felt her throat tighten. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered, loud enough only for her to hear. "Always have been, always will be." The ceremony began with Reverend Miller, who'd baptized both Tom and Sarah, speaking about love that weathers storms and grows stronger through hardship. His words felt like a healing balm after Mrs. Hartwell's poison, and Sarah felt herself relaxing into the comfort of familiar traditions and honest affection. When it came time for the vows, Tom's voice rang clear and strong through the hall. "Sarah Beth, I promise to love you in lean times and good times, in sickness and in health. I promise to work hard every day to build a life we can be proud of, not because of what we own, but because of how we love. You've made me a better man, and I'll spend every day trying to deserve you." Sarah's own vows came from her heart, unrehearsed and trembling. "Tom, you saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You've shown me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in moments like these, surrounded by people who genuinely care. I promise to stand beside you, to believe in us, and to never forget that what we have is more precious than gold." As Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in genuine applause and cheers. Tom kissed her softly, then more deeply, and for that perfect moment, nothing else existed but the two of them and the life they were beginning together. But as they turned to walk back down the aisle, Mrs. Hartwell's voice cut through the celebration once more. She wasn't even trying to whisper now. Well, that was certainly quaint. "Victoria, dear, we really should leave before they serve whatever passes for a reception meal in this establishment. I can't imagine it's safe to eat," several guests gasped. Tom's father struggled to stand, his face red with anger. Sarah's mother looked stricken, but before anyone else could respond, Tom stopped walking. He turned slowly, his hand still holding Sarah's, and looked directly at Mrs. Hartwell. The silence that fell was absolute. "Mrs. Hartwell," Tom said, his voice controlled, but carrying to every corner of the room. I'm going to guess you don't remember me. The woman blinked, looking at him with confusion mixed with disdain. I most certainly do not. Why would I? 15 years ago, Tom continued, his words measured and clear. You came into the emergency room at County Hospital. You'd been in a car accident. Minor injuries, but you were panicking, demanding to see a doctor immediately, shouting at the nurses about your importance and your husband's connections. Mrs. Hartwell's face paled slightly, but she lifted her chin. I hardly see what that has to do with... I was 17, Tom continued. Volunteering in the ER because I was thinking about becoming a paramedic. There was another woman brought in that night, a young mother with 2 small kids. She'd been in a worse accident, bleeding badly, and the doctors were working on her. But you kept screaming that you should be treated first because you had money and status. You actually said the other woman probably had Medicaid anyway, so what did it matter? The color was draining from Mrs. Hartwell's face now. Victoria had covered her mouth with her hand, horror in her eyes. Sarah squeezed Tom's hand, suddenly understanding something profound about the man she'd married. That woman died, Tom said quietly. Not because of you, not because of any delay, but I'll never forget the doctor telling me afterward that your screaming, your demands, had made it harder for everyone to focus. I'll never forget those little kids sitting in the waiting room, confused and scared, while you complained about the quality of the magazines. If this moment touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Stories like these need to be shared. Tom took a breath, his voice softening. So when you sit in my wedding, surrounded by people who may not have money but who have more genuine kindness in their hearts than you'll ever understand, and you insult my wife, you insult everything that matters. You're welcome to leave, Mrs. Hartwell, but before you do, you might want to think about what really makes a person rich. The room remained frozen. Every eye on the elegant woman whose face had crumbled from superiority to shame. Mrs. Hartwell stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made several people flinch. Her hands shook as she reached for her designer purse, and Sarah could see that beneath the perfectly applied makeup, tears were beginning to form. Victoria reached for her arm, but the older woman pulled away, stumbling slightly on her expensive heels. I need to leave, she whispered, her voice cracking. I need to leave right now. But as she turned toward the door, Tom's father stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking before his accident. Before you go, I'd like to say something if you'll permit me. She froze, not turning around, her shoulders rigid with humiliation. My son, Tom's father continued, learned about forgiveness from his mother. She was a saint, that woman. When I had my accident and couldn't work anymore, when we lost almost everything we'd built, she never complained once. She taught Tom that people deserve second chances, that mistakes don't have to define us. He paused, clearing his throat. Now, I'm not saying what you did wasn't wrong. It was. But I am saying that you have a choice right now about what kind of person you want to be from this moment forward. Mrs. Hartwell turned slowly, her carefully composed face finally showing genuine emotion. Tears ran down her cheeks, tracking through her foundation. She looked at Tom, then at Sarah, then at the assembled guests who were all watching her with a mixture of anger and curiosity. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. I've been horrible. Sarah felt Tom's hand tighten around hers. She could sense him struggling with his own emotions, the old anger from that night 15 years ago mixing with the man he'd become since then. She thought about all the times she'd felt judged for her second-hand clothes, her humble upbringing, the way some people looked at her when they learned her mother cleaned houses. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed as less than, and yet standing there in her grandmother's yellowed dress, surrounded by people who loved her not for what she had but for who she was, Sarah realized she held something Mrs. Hartwell might never possess, the security of being genuinely valued. You don't have to leave, Sarah heard herself say. The word surprised even her. Tom looked at her with questioning eyes, but she gave his hand a small squeeze. You're right that what you said was hurtful. But if you stay, you might understand what you've been missing all these years. Mrs. Hartwell stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. Why would you want me to stay? After what I said? Because, Sarah said softly, You're going to be Victoria's mother-in-law, and Victoria is Tom's cousin. That means we're family in a way. And family, even when they mess up badly, they get second chances. That's what we believe anyway. Victoria's face transformed with relief and gratitude. She moved to Mrs. Hartwell's side, taking her arm gently. "Catherine, please. Sarah's offering you something precious. Don't throw it away." The elegant woman seemed to collapse inward, her sophisticated facade crumbling completely. "I've been so awful for so long," she whispered. "Since my husband died 5 years ago, I've just been angry at everyone and everything. I thought having money meant I was better than people who didn't. I thought it gave me the right to judge." She looked directly at Tom. "I don't remember that night in the hospital, but I believe you. I believe that's exactly how I would have acted, and I'm ashamed." Reverend Miller, who'd been watching this unfold with wise eyes, spoke up then. "Shame can be a teacher if we let it, but it shouldn't be a prison. Why don't you sit back down, ma'am, and let this young couple teach you something about what real celebration looks like? Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Let us know in the comments how you found the strength." Mrs. Hartwell nodded slowly, allowing Victoria to guide her back to her seat. But as she sat down, she did something unexpected. She removed her expensive necklace, a string of what looked like genuine pearls, and held it out to Sarah. "Please," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know it can't make up for my behavior, but I'd like you to have this. Not because I'm trying to buy forgiveness, but because I want you to know that I see you now. I really see you." Sarah looked at the necklace, then at Tom. He shrugged slightly, leaving the choice to her. After a moment, Sarah reached out and accepted it, not putting it on, but holding it carefully. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'll treasure it." As the tension finally broke and guests began to relax, Tom's uncle struck up a celebratory tune on his guitar, and Sarah's aunt announced that the cake was ready to be cut. But everyone in that room knew they'd witnessed something rare and precious, the moment when pride cracked open to reveal the possibility of grace. The reception began with a sweetness that felt earned rather than expected. Sarah's aunt had made a simple 3-layer cake with white frosting and fresh strawberries from the farmer's market, and when Tom and Sarah cut into it together, their hands joined on the knife. The room erupted in genuine cheers. Mrs. Hartwell watched from her chair, Victoria beside her, both women smiling with what looked like real happiness. As guests lined up for cake and coffee, people began sharing stories. Tom's father told about the time teenage Tom had worked 3 jobs one summer to buy his mother a used wheelchair after her first stroke. Sarah's mother, her eyes still red from crying, spoke about how Sarah used to save half her lunch in elementary school to share with a classmate whose family couldn't always afford food. The stories weren't boastful, just gentle reminders of the everyday kindness that had always defined this couple. Mrs. Hartwell listened to everything, and Sarah noticed the older woman's expression changing gradually from shame to something that looked almost like wonder. During a lull in the conversation, Victoria encouraged her gently. "Catherine, why don't you tell them about the charity work you used to do before Richard died?" The elegant woman hesitated, then spoke softly. "I had forgotten about that, honestly. My husband and I used to volunteer at a soup kitchen every Thanksgiving. We started doing it the first year we were married, when we didn't have much ourselves. Richard grew up poor, you see, and he never forgot it. But after he passed and left me with all his wealth, I think I buried that memory. It hurt too much to remember who we'd been together." She looked at Sarah with genuine sorrow. "I became the very thing he would have despised. A person who used money as a weapon instead of a tool for good." Tom sat down across from Mrs. Hartwell, Sarah settling beside him. "It's not too late to change," Tom said gently. "My mother used to say that every morning when you wake up, you get to choose what kind of person you'll be that day. Some days we choose poorly, but there's always tomorrow." "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Mrs. Hartwell said. "I wish I could have known her." "She would have liked you," Tom said, and Sarah heard the forgiveness in his voice. "Not the you who walked in here today, but the you you're trying to become right now." As the afternoon wore on, something beautiful happened. Mrs. Hartwell asked Sarah's mother about her work cleaning houses, and instead of disdain, she showed genuine interest in the challenges and small victories of that labor. She spoke with Tom's father about farming, admitting she'd grown up on a small farm herself before marrying into wealth. She even helped serve cake, her elegant suit now slightly wrinkled. Her makeup smudged from tears, but her face more peaceful than it had been all day. When Tom's uncle called everyone to the small cleared space for dancing, Tom led Sarah onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. He held her close as the guitar played at last, and Sarah felt the rightness of everything settle into her bones. This wasn't the wedding she'd dreamed about as a little girl looking at magazines full of elaborate ceremonies. It was better. It was real. "I'm proud of you," Tom whispered in her ear, "for having the grace to let her stay." "I'm proud of you for standing up for us," Sarah whispered back, "but also for knowing when to offer forgiveness." As they swayed together, Sarah saw Mrs. Hartwell stand and approach Tom's father. The older woman held out her hand hesitantly. "I don't suppose you'd dance with a foolish old woman who's been reminded today what really matters." Tom's father smiled, his weathered face crinkling with warmth. "I'd be honored, ma'am." He set aside his cane and took her hand, and they joined the other couples on the floor, moving slowly but with dignity. The moment felt like something sacred, a testament to the transformative power of honesty and grace. Sarah caught Jenny's eye across the room, and her best friend gave her a thumbs up, mouthing, "I told you it would be perfect." As the sun began to set through the community hall windows, painting everything in golden light, Victoria approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Catherine has been so bitter since Uncle Richard died. I've watched her push away everyone who cared about her. But today you and Tom showed her something she'd forgotten. You showed her that people are more than their bank accounts, and that real class comes from the heart. If you've been enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales about love, forgiveness, and the things that truly matter in life." Sarah hugged her, feeling the tension of the day finally releasing its grip. "We all need reminding sometimes about what's important," she said. "Even me." Even Tom. Today reminded us too. As the evening ended and guests began to leave, each person stopped to hug the bride and groom, offering blessings and well wishes. Mrs. Hartwell was one of the last to approach. She took Sarah's hands in hers, and Sarah noticed the older woman's fingers, despite their expensive rings, were trembling. "Thank you for teaching me something I desperately needed to learn," Mrs. Hartwell said. "I came here today thinking I was better than everyone. I'm leaving knowing I have a lot to live up to." 3 months later, on a crisp November morning, Sarah was working her shift at the county hospital when she received an unexpected call to come to the volunteer coordinator's office. Confused, she made her way through the familiar corridors, wondering if she'd done something wrong. Tom had taken a permanent position with a construction company that offered good benefits, and they'd finally moved into a small apartment of their own. Life had been sweet and simple, exactly what they'd hoped for. When she opened the office door, she found Mrs. Hartwell sitting there, dressed more simply than Sarah had ever seen her, in neat slacks and a modest sweater. The coordinator, Mrs. Chen, smiled warmly. "Sarah, Mrs. Hartwell has something she'd like to discuss with you." Catherine Hartwell stood, her expression both nervous and hopeful. "I hope you don't mind me coming here. Victoria gave me your work information. I wanted to tell you something important." She took a breath. "I've established a charitable foundation in my late husband's name, the Richard Hartwell Foundation. It will provide scholarships for nursing students from low-income families and fund improvements to community hospitals in rural areas." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Mrs. Hartwell, that's wonderful. Please call me Catherine," the older woman said softly. "And there's more. I'd like you to serve on the board of directors. You and Tom both, if he's willing. I need people who understand what it means to struggle, who know which causes truly matter. I've spent too many years surrounded by people who think like I used to think. I need voices like yours to keep me honest." Sarah didn't know what to say. She looked at Mrs. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "Catherine came to me first to ask about making a donation to our volunteer program. She's already committed a significant amount to fund new equipment for the emergency room." "I remembered what Tom said," Catherine explained, her voice catching. "About that night 15 years ago, about how my behavior made things harder for everyone. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better. The foundation will also fund emergency room staffing, so that places like this have enough nurses and doctors that nobody, regardless of their wealth or status, has to wait for life-saving care. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She moved forward and hugged Catherine, feeling the older woman stiffen for just a moment before melting into the embrace. "You didn't have to do this," Sarah whispered. "Yes, I did," Catherine whispered back. "Your wedding saved my life, Sarah. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way that matters most. You and Tom reminded me of who I used to be, who my husband loved, who I want to be again before it's too late." Over the following months, Sarah and Tom did join the Foundation's board. They met monthly with Catherine and Victoria, along with doctors, community leaders, and other people who'd experienced hardship firsthand. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful. Catherine proved to be a changed woman, using her wealth not as a source of pride but as a tool for genuine good. She'd even started volunteering at the soup kitchen again, something she said made her feel close to her late husband. On their first anniversary, Tom and Sarah returned to the same community hall where they'd been married. This time, they'd organized a small gathering to present the Foundation's first scholarships to 3 local students pursuing nursing degrees. Catherine stood beside them as they handed out the awards, and Sarah noticed the older woman's face was radiant with purpose. After the ceremony, as people mingled over coffee and cake, Catherine pulled Sarah aside. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small framed photograph. It showed a much younger Catherine and a handsome man with kind eyes, both wearing aprons and serving food at what looked like a soup kitchen. "That's Richard and me 30 years ago. I found it last week while going through old boxes. I want you to have it." "Catherine, I can't take this," Sarah protested. "It's too precious." "That's exactly why you should have it," Catherine insisted. "You and Tom gave me back something I thought was lost forever. The memory of who I really am underneath all the money and pretense. This photograph represents that truth. Keep it to remind yourself that people can change, that grace and forgiveness have real power." Sarah accepted the photograph, looking at the young couple frozen in time, their faces full of hope and purpose. She thought about her wedding day, how what could have been ruined by cruelty had instead become a turning point, not just for her and Tom, but for Catherine too. She thought about the students who'd just received scholarships, and the patients who'd receive better care because of the Foundation's work. One small act of grace had rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Tom joined them, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist. "You two plotting something?" he asked with a gentle smile. "Just remembering," Catherine said, her eyes bright. "Just being grateful." As the afternoon sun streamed through those same community hall windows, Sarah looked around at the gathered people, rich and poor, young and old, all brought together by a shared commitment to kindness. She thought about how easy it would have been to let bitterness win that day, to let Catherine's cruel words poison their celebration. Instead, they'd chosen grace, and that choice had transformed not just one life but many. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts about forgiveness and second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories about the power of compassion. Thank you for spending this time with us, and may you always remember that the richest life is one filled not with things, but with love, purpose, and the courage to offer grace, even when it's hard. Until next time, take care of each other.